The evening air in Montana carried with it the scent of pine and earth, the kind of fragrance that seemed to whisper of solitude and wide horizons where silence stretched farther than any man's courage. Samuel Brennan stood at the doorway of his small cabin, the last traces of sunlight spilling across the worn wooden floor when she appeared, an apparition carved from strength and sorrow, a woman so tall that she seemed to belong more to the sky than to the earth. She filled the doorway, blocking out the world behind her, and with a voice touched by a foreign accent, she uttered words that would tilt the course of his existence forever. "Tonight you choose your bed." Those words were not simply an offer. They were a confession, a history of pain condensed into a single breath, carrying with them the echoes of every rejection, every whisper in the dark corners of a village. Every night she had folded herself into emptiness and prayed to be less. Her name was Ingrid Len, though he did not know yet how her name would come to mean home. Her figure towered like an oak tree, and yet in her glacier blue eyes shimmered the fragility of someone who had long since forgotten what it meant to be wanted. Samuel, who had buried not just a wife, but the fragile heartbeat of his infant son beneath frozen soil 3 winters past, felt something stir inside him that he thought had died forever. Grief had walled off his heart, locking away love where no sunrise could touch it. But in that instant the ice cracked, if only by a sliver, as he saw not a giant, but a woman trembling with the unbearable weight of being unwanted. The silence that stretched between them was not empty. It pulsed with unspoken stories, with brokenness, and with the faintest seed of hope daring to sprout through the cracks of 2 battered souls. Her words trembled as she tried to cloak her pain in stoicism, insisting she would never force herself upon him, that she had long been called Ewan Scott, unwanted. She offered him a choice, to share his bed or to let her sleep among the animals in the cold. She said it with resignation, like someone already rehearsed in rejection, someone too accustomed to being cast aside. And Samuel, whose heart had long been hollow, found his throat burn with the urge to undo her sorrow. "The bed," he heard himself say, though even he was startled by the warmth in his own voice. "With you in it." She turned away too quickly, as though afraid his words might dissolve if she lingered. Yet he saw it. A single tear wiped with the back of her massive hand, a crack in her armor, proof that behind the fortress of muscle and size lived a heart that had always yearned to be held tenderly. In that moment, Samuel realized that love, the kind he had buried in the ground with his past, was not dead at all. It had only been waiting for a storm strong enough to awaken it. And Ingrid, standing in his cabin doorway with all her towering sorrow and trembling hope, was the storm he had never known he needed. That night, as the wind howled against the walls like some restless spirit of the plains, 2 strangers lay side by side, wrapped in silence and quilts, neither yet daring to cross the invisible distance between them. Samuel listened to her breath, the careful restraint of someone who had always tried to take up less space, and his chest ached with the recognition of loneliness that mirrored his own. In the shadows, healing stirred, not loud, not sudden, but soft and unassuming, like a fragile flame lit in a cavern long thought empty. It is in these beginnings that the seeds of the greatest love stories are sown, not in perfection, but in brokenness, finding brokenness, in grief finding its reflection, in courage daring to whisper into the void. And as the first chapter of Samuel and Ingrid's story opened under the Montana night sky, neither could yet know how this choice, so simple on the surface, would unravel the sorrow of years and awaken a love powerful enough to heal what the world had declared unworthy. If your heart feels even a spark of this warmth, let it linger. Let it remind you that healing begins in the smallest moments, like a word spoken gently, like a hand reaching across silence. And if you believe in stories that reveal how love can bloom where the world least expects it, stay close to this tale. Like, share your thoughts, and subscribe so you never miss another moment where love dares to choose the brave instead of the easy. Because sometimes all it takes is the courage to believe that no one is too much, that every soul, no matter how scarred, is exactly enough. And so their story begins, moving softly into the next dawn, where vulnerability will meet its first test. The cabin held a darkness that was not hostile, but heavy with breath and memory, a silence broken only by the restless sigh of the wind as it pressed against the walls like an old lament. Samuel lay stiff on the mattress, every muscle alert, not because of fear, but because of the strange awareness of another presence near him. He could feel the weight of Ingrid's body turned toward the wall, her frame curved inward as if she could fold herself into something smaller, more acceptable, less than what she was. The quilts rustled faintly when she shifted, each sound betraying her struggle to be invisible even here, even in the one place meant to be sanctuary. Her restraint struck him harder than her sighs ever could. He sensed the tremor in her breath, the subtle pauses where she forced quiet into her lungs, and then the sound came, fragile, shattering. A broken sob pressed into the fabric of the night, so soft that anyone less wounded might have missed it. Samuel did not miss it. It pierced through him, awakening a part of his soul that had been starved for years. This woman, capable of carrying trunks alone and shattering fence posts with her strength, was crying with the caution of someone terrified of being heard. The tenderness of her pain undid him. Something in him broke open, not like glass shattered, but like soil yielding to rain after years of drought. He reached across the cold expanse of quilt, his hand tentative, as though touching her might collapse the fragile walls she had built for survival. His palm found the slope of her shoulder, broad, powerful, trembling beneath his touch. She stiffened instantly, a reflex born of too many cruel gestures, too many hands that had only pushed, shoved, dismissed. "Don't," she whispered, her voice cracking like ice underfoot. "Please. I cannot bear kindness right now. It will undo me." Her plea was not rejection. It was the confession of someone so used to blows that gentleness itself felt unbearable. Samuel's heart clenched. "Then come undone," he breathed. And in those 3 words he offered not pity but permission, the kind of permission she had never received. Permission to be weak, to release, to surrender to the truth that she no longer had to carry her sorrow alone. Slowly, with the cautious movements of a wild creature caught between instinct and hope, she turned toward him. The moonlight seeped through the small cabin window, spilling across her face. Tears glistened on her cheeks like silver threads, marking her not as weak, but as profoundly human. Samuel's chest ached at the sight. She was not terrifying. She was heartbreakingly beautiful, strong and fragile all at once. Her size did not diminish her femininity. It magnified the courage of her vulnerability. He saw it clearly then. Every year she had been forced to carry burdens too heavy for one heart. Every glance of disapproval, every whisper of ridicule, every season of loneliness had carved themselves into her bones. And yet here she was, lying in his bed, allowing him a glimpse past the armor no one else had been brave enough to look beyond. "Ingrid," he murmured her name, letting it roll softly across the air like a prayer. Her eyes, flecked with moonlit silver, met his, wide with disbelief that anyone might call her by name with such warmth. He brushed his thumb gently across her cheek, tracing the wet line where her tears had fallen. "Do you know what I felt when I reached for you just now?" She shook her head, unable to speak. "You flinched, like you expected me to strike you. And it broke me, because no one should live expecting cruelty. No one should have to carry their heart alone for so long." The sob that came from her chest was not a careful cry this time. It was raw, shaking, the release of years locked behind her ribs. She collapsed into him, her body folding against his, her sobs shaking them both. Samuel gathered her in his arms, holding her not as a burden, but as something precious, something worth protecting. Her hair smelled of soap and wind and dust, and he pressed his lips into it, whispering words she had waited her whole life to hear. "You are not too much. You are exactly enough." She clung to him like a drowning woman who had finally found a shore. Her tears soaked his shirt, her breath hitched against his chest, and Samuel realized that this was the first time in years he felt alive. Not numb, not merely existing, but alive, with a warmth blooming in his chest that pushed back the cold shadows of grief. This was healing, not only for her, but for him too. For in holding her, he felt his own heart mending, his own wounds soothed by the simple act of being needed. When her sobs softened, she lifted her swollen face to his, confusion mingling with awe. "Why do you not turn away?" she whispered, as though the question itself carried the weight of every rejection she had ever endured. Samuel's answer came with the fierce clarity of truth. "Because when I look at you, I see someone brave enough to cross an ocean alone, strong enough to live in a world that told her she was wrong, soft enough to still hope that someone might see her. I see you, Ingrid. And what I see is the answer to a prayer I didn't even know I had." Her lips trembled, her tears shimmering anew, but this time they carried a different weight, not of shame, but of hope dawning for the first time in years. She leaned into his touch, her hand gripping his, as though anchoring herself to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she was not beyond love. Samuel held her gaze, steady and unflinching, silently promising that he would stand in the storm of her doubts until she could believe it too. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, the night still wild and merciless. Yet within the cabin, wrapped in the fragile warmth of new beginnings, two broken souls found the first fragile threads of healing woven between them. And as dawn waited quietly beyond the horizon, Samuel knew one truth with certainty, that love had just begun its quiet work, and it would change them both. Morning crept into the cabin like a hesitant guest, the grey light slipping through cracks in the shutters, painting long streaks across the wooden floor. Samuel woke first, his arm heavy and numb beneath Ingrid's head, though he did not dare move. Her breath was steady now, her face softened by sleep in a way he suspected it had not been in years. Her hand, broad and calloused yet surprisingly delicate in its grasp, was still locked in his, their fingers intertwined as if the night had bound them together in a silent vow. For the first time since the war, since the graves he had dug with frozen hands, Samuel felt a kind of peace settle into his bones. Not the fleeting numbness of forgetting, but the quiet healing of belonging. He studied her in the fragile light, memorizing the curve of her jaw, the loose strands of golden hair that had escaped her braid and fanned across his pillow like threads of sunlight, the way her chest rose and fell with unhurried calm. She filled the bed, her presence large, undeniable, yet instead of crowding him, she seemed to shelter him, as though her size itself was a fortress built not to intimidate, but to protect. He realized then that he had never truly slept in safety until this moment, wrapped not in solitude, but in the certainty of her nearness. The world beyond their walls stirred awake, the muffled ring of the blacksmith's hammer, the distant laughter of children, the clatter of hooves in the dirt street. But within these four walls, time seemed suspended, holding them in a fragile cocoon that he wished could last forever. Yet he knew the moment could not. Already he imagined the words whispered beyond their door, the sideways glances that would follow them through town, the judgment carved into every look. Cedar Ridge was not a place that welcomed difference, and Ingrid was a woman who could never be hidden. Ingrid stirred beside him, her eyelids fluttering open. For an instant she looked young, disoriented, her gaze searching the room before memory returned like a wave. He saw the flicker of last night's vulnerability rush back over her features, the tears, the collapse, the release. And just as swiftly he saw her begin to rebuild the walls. She pulled back from him, her movements sudden, almost frantic, as though closeness itself was dangerous. "I am sorry," she said, her voice thicker with her accent in the morning, every syllable wrapped in regret. "I should not have. Last night I was weak. I should not have burdened you." She rose quickly, her frame too large for the small room, her movements filling the space with restless energy. The apology cut him like a blade. "Don't you dare apologize for being human," he said, his voice quiet but firm. He sat up, refusing to let the distance grow. Yet she was already fastening invisible armor around herself, the squared shoulders, the carefully blank expression, the stiff formality of her words. "I will make breakfast," she murmured, "then begin the work on the ranch. You will see, Mr. Brennan, I am worth what you paid. I am strong. I can work harder than any man." He rose then, crossing the floor to stop her before she reached the door. His presence blocked her way, not with force, but with determination. "Is that all you think you're worth? Your labor?" She froze, her hand tightening on the doorframe, her back rigid. "It is all I have ever been worth," she whispered. The confession hung in the air like smoke, bitter and heavy. Samuel felt the ache of it spread through him, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to speak the truth of his own heart. "Last night you let me see you, not the strength, not the armor, but you. And now you want to pretend it never happened. Why? Because the sun rose, and the world tells you nothing has changed. It has, Ingrid. Everything has. I don't need you to prove your worth by breaking your back on my land. I don't need a laborer. I need someone who knows what it costs to be lonely in a crowded room, someone who understands the weight of silence. I need you." Her glacier blue eyes lifted to meet his, wet with unshed tears, wide with disbelief. No man had ever spoken to her this way, not once in all her years. She tried to speak, but no sound came. Samuel reached for her hand, taking it gently into his own, that massive hand he held as if it were the most fragile thing in the world. "Let me know you," he said softly. "Let me learn you, every scar, every story. Let me prove that you were never too much, that you are exactly, perfectly enough." Her breath shuddered, and for a moment he thought she might relent, might allow herself to believe. But then came a hard knock at the door, sharp and insistent, the sound of the world demanding entry into their fragile dawn. Ingrid's hand slipped from his, her body stiffening, the mask falling back into place as though their tender moment had been no more than a dream. When she opened the door, 3 women stood waiting, their faces dressed in false sweetness, their eyes glinting with the poison of judgment. They carried not bread nor welcome, but the weight of gossip and scorn. And as Samuel stood behind Ingrid, his hand steady at the small of her back, he knew the battle they faced would not be against silence alone. It would be against a town determined to strip her of the worth he had only just begun to show her. The healing they had touched in the night trembled like a fragile flame, now faced with the cold wind of a world unwilling to see. But Samuel, with his heart cracked open and his courage newly awakened, vowed that this time he would not let the flame be extinguished. And so the day began, not with peace, but with the first clash between love's quiet defiance and the cruelty of a narrow world. The 3 women stood like shadows of propriety in the morning light, their polished shoes on Samuel's porch, and their hands folded with practiced grace. Behind their smiles lurked sharpness, a kind of judgment wrapped in lace and ribbons. Martha Henderson spoke first, her voice dripping with false warmth. "We've come to welcome you properly, Mrs. Brennan." Yet even as she said it, her eyes travelled up and down Ingrid's towering figure, lingering with disdain, as if cataloguing every reason she did not belong. Eliza Cooper, stiff as a ledger line, added, "Perhaps you might benefit from some guidance. How things are done here, how a proper wife conducts herself." The words were daggers hidden in embroidery, and Ingrid felt them pierce deeper than any blade. She stood silent, filling the doorway, her body a fortress, though her heart threatened to shrink into the corners. Behind her, Samuel felt the shift in her muscles, the way she tried to make herself small again, folding inward as if bracing for the storm of rejection she had weathered all her life. Then came Sarah Mitchell, who fancied herself the voice of the church, her smile a mask stretched too thin. "You must understand, Samuel," she said sweetly. "The whole town is talking. A woman of such unusual size and strength. It seems unnatural. Some even whisper she may be touched by darkness." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a poisoned fire. Ingrid's spine stiffened. The wound was not new, but each repetition sliced her raw. Samuel's hand pressed against the small of her back, steady, grounding. In that touch lay both healing and fury, and when he stepped forward, his voice cut across their false sweetness like thunder. "Get off my property." They blinked, taken aback. "Samuel, we're only trying—" Martha began, but his tone deepened, quiet and sharp as steel. "I said get off my property before I forget. I was raised to be polite to ladies." The colour drained from their faces, but still they lingered, offended by the audacity of a man defending a woman the town had already judged. Samuel advanced, his jaw tight, his words burning. "My wife crossed an ocean to be here. She is braver than anyone in this town, stronger than anyone who dares whisper behind her back. If you cannot see that, then that says everything about you, and nothing about her." The women faltered, their dignity unravelling, and with a huff of insult they retreated down the steps, their skirts rustling like angry wings. Samuel closed the door behind them, his chest heaving, his hands trembling, not with fear, but with the sheer force of defending something sacred. When he turned, Ingrid was staring at him as though she had never seen a miracle until this moment. Her lips parted, her eyes shimmering with tears she could not hold back. "You defended me." Samuel crossed to her, cupping her face with hands that knew both tenderness and resolve. "Of course I did, and I will defend you every day for the rest of our lives, if that is what it takes. You are not too much, Ingrid. You are exactly enough." The words unravelled something inside her that had been knotted since childhood. For years she had borne the insults, the whispers, the sideways glances, wearing strength like armour, telling herself she could endure it. But no one, not once, had stood in front of her, declaring her worthy in the face of cruelty. Until now. Until him. She kissed him then, not timidly but fiercely, pouring into that moment every gratitude, every longing, every desperate hope she had ever buried. Their lips met with the urgency of two souls who had lived too long in the cold and had finally found warmth. Samuel held her as though she was the only truth that mattered, as though he had been waiting his whole life for this exact storm of passion and tenderness. When they pulled apart, breathless, Ingrid whispered, "What will we do? The town will not stop. They will make our lives miserable." Samuel's mouth curved into a quiet, unshaken smile. "Let them try." And so began the quiet war. Not with rifles and blood as Samuel had known in Virginia, but with whispers, with withheld supplies, with doors slammed in their faces. By noon, half the town knew he had thrown the church ladies off his porch. By nightfall, all of Cedar Ridge buzzed with judgment. The blacksmith refused to shoe their horses. The general store suddenly had no flour, no coffee, no nails, and always the same cutting smiles, always the same silent verdict. Ingrid worked harder than ever, from dawn to dusk, repairing fences, clearing stones from the north field, hauling water until her arms ached. But when night fell, Samuel heard her muffled sobs again, softer now, careful, as though even her grief might take up too much space. His heart broke anew with each sound, but he never turned away. Instead, he lay beside her, holding her close, whispering into her hair that she was enough, that she had always been enough, until her breath steadied against him. The battle lines of Cedar Ridge had been drawn, yet Samuel knew this was only the beginning. The town's cruelty would sharpen before it dulled. But in his arms lay a woman whose worth could not be measured by their narrow eyes, and he vowed with the certainty of a man reborn that he would stand beside her through it all. Outside, the stars scattered across the endless Montana sky, ancient witnesses to the beginning of a love fierce enough to challenge the world. And as dawn rose again over the mountains, their quiet war continued. Yet so too did the healing, like wildflowers breaking through stone, unstoppable, reaching toward the light. The next days unfolded not with peace, but with quiet cruelty. The kind of battle waged in whispers and cold shoulders, in locked doors and narrowed eyes. Samuel and Ingrid felt it in every step they took down the dirt road of Cedar Ridge. By the second morning, the blacksmith, who had once been quick with a greeting, stood at his forge and claimed he was too busy, though his anvil sat untouched and his fire cold. The general store shelves, once open to Samuel on credit for years without question, now claimed to be bare. Flour, next week. Coffee, out of stock. Nails and lamp oil, always gone. Yet there they were, stacked behind Eliza Cooper's shoulder, plain to see. The punishment was not silence alone, but denial, meant to press them into submission. Samuel watched his wife bear it with the same stoicism that had carried her across an ocean. She lifted her chin higher, squared her shoulders, and returned each cutting glance with stillness. But he could feel the tremor beneath her calm. She worked harder than any man, mending fences, hauling buckets of water, clearing fields Samuel had avoided for years. At night, she whispered her prayers in Norwegian, soft words that drifted through the cabin like healing songs, though he could hear the faint tremor of tears she tried to swallow. He never let her finish alone. His hand would find hers in the dark, their fingers twining, a silent vow stronger than any promise spoken aloud. On the third day, he saddled his horse at dawn. Ingrid asked to come, offering to carry the supplies herself. But fear flickered in her eyes even as the words left her lips. The thought of facing the entire town again, their stares, their whispers, the cruel judgment dressed as piety, it pressed against her ribs like iron. Samuel placed a hand over hers. "Stay, rest, you've carried enough." She nodded, half relieved, half ashamed, and watched him ride toward town with her heart clenched tight. The general store was nearly empty when he arrived, yet Eliza Cooper's posture was sharp as ever. "Mr. Brennan," she said, not meeting his eyes. He named the supplies, placed money on the counter, more than enough. She counted each coin with exaggerated slowness, then slid them back. "Credit is no longer available, payment up front only, store policy." Samuel's jaw tightened. "I've never missed a payment in 3 years. "For certain customers," she said, closing the ledger as though sealing a verdict. He placed the coins back on the counter, steady, firm. "Then payment it is." She gave him flour and coffee, but when he asked for nails, sugar, lamp oil, her mouth curved with false regret. "Out of stock." Samuel glanced past her to the shelves, stacked full. His voice dropped low. "Are you refusing to sell to me because of my wife?" Her face flushed, her chin lifting like a blade. "I'm refusing nothing. We are simply out. And besides, Mr. Brennan, even if there were goods, a woman like that, too large, too strong, too unnatural, she unsettles people. Everyone knows it. She frightens the children. She prays in strange words, makes strange gestures. It's not natural." Samuel's fury surged, but before his words could fall, the door opened. Ingrid filled the frame, her presence unshakable, her eyes blazing not with shame, but with a fire Samuel had never seen before. She had followed him despite her fear, despite the weight of the town's scorn. Her voice, thick with her Norwegian lilt, rang clear. "Do you think I do not hear? I have heard these words my whole life, too big, too strong, too wrong, always the same whispers, always the same fear in your eyes." She stepped forward, towering, her presence unashamed. "But I will tell you this. I am not afraid of you anymore. I am not ashamed of myself anymore. Because that man," she pointed to Samuel, looked at me and saw what no one else would. He saw someone worth defending, worth loving, and if he can see it, then it must be true. Her words cut through the store like a blade of truth, silencing even the self-righteous breath in Eliza's chest. Samuel's pride swelled as he stood beside her, the two of them shoulder to shoulder, unmovable. He reached across the counter, laid down every coin he carried, and began lifting supplies from the shelves himself. Eliza gasped, frozen in place, but she did not stop him. Ingrid joined him, her strong arms carrying twice the weight of his, her head held high as though centuries of chains had just shattered. When they stepped into the street, the entire town was watching. Faces leaned from doorways, whispers curled like smoke in the morning air. They stood together, arms full of flour, sugar, nails, and coffee, unashamed. For the first time since her arrival, Ingrid did not bow her head. She stood tall, her eyes alight with defiance, her heart steady with something close to freedom. Samuel felt it too, that the world might still sneer, might still try to crush them with coldness, but it could not reach what was between them. And as they loaded their wagon under the stares of a town that refused to see, Samuel tightened his hand around hers. Healing had begun, not quietly now, but boldly, with voices raised against cruelty. And as they drove away with the supplies they had claimed, the mountains stretched wide before them, a horizon that whispered of trials still to come, but also of a love resilient enough to face them all. The wagon creaked as it rolled out of Cedar Ridge, its wheels grinding against the dirt road, while a dozen pairs of eyes followed them with suspicion and scorn. Samuel kept his hands steady on the reins, but he could feel Ingrid's gaze fixed forward, her shoulders squared, her back unbending. For the first time since she had stepped into this town, she did not shrink beneath their stares. Instead, her presence filled the road with quiet defiance, her head lifted like a banner against the world's contempt. An old voice called out, halting the wagon. Jacob Reeves, the widower who lived north of Samuel's land, stood in the street, his limp slowing him but not stopping him. He raised his hand, his hat pressed to his chest. "Mrs. Brennan," he said, his voice hoarse yet steady, "I owe you an apology." Ingrid blinked, startled. The crowd hushed. Jacob shifted, shame etched into the lines of his face. "I saw you in the fields this week. You cleared that north section in 3 days, ground that beat me and 4 hired men last spring. I gave up, but you did it alone. That's not unnatural, Ma'am. That's extraordinary." His eyes shone with sincerity, the kind of respect that no whisper could undo. Ingrid's lips parted, her breath catching as tears gathered against her will. She whispered the only words she could manage. "Thank you." Samuel felt her hand slide into his, trembling yet strong, as Jacob Reeves turned to face the crowd, his stance a quiet shield. It was a beginning, a crack of light breaking through the heavy walls of judgment. As Samuel drove the wagon onward, he saw it in Ingrid's face, the faintest glimmer of healing. For once, she was not only defended by him, but seen, acknowledged by another soul who recognized her worth. That night, Samuel woke to find the bed empty. Panic struck him until he saw her silhouette at the window, draped in one of his old shirts, the moonlight wrapping her in silver. She stood like a sentinel against the horizon, her figure both fragile and immense. He rose quietly and came to her side. Her voice was soft, trembling, but resolute. "I have been thinking," she said, her accent thickened by emotion. "All my life, I believed a lie, that I was too much, too large, too strong, too loud, too everything. I thought if I could just make myself smaller, someone might love me. But you never asked me to be less. From the first moment, you saw me as I am, and you chose me anyway." Her eyes turned toward him, shining with tears that no longer carried shame, but release. "Do you understand what you gave me, Samuel? Permission. Permission to take up space. To stop apologizing for existing. To be enough." Her voice broke, but this time not in despair. It broke open like a bud giving way to bloom. She pressed his hand against her chest over the steady thrum of her heart. "I was strong for everyone else. My father's boats, my mother's frailty, the voyage across the ocean. But I was never strong enough to believe I deserved love. Not until you." Samuel pulled her into his arms, his lips pressed into her hair. "You were always strong enough. You just needed someone to remind you, to stand beside you until you believed it for yourself." They held each other in the hush of the night, two souls who had carried too much, finding in one another the freedom to finally set it down. Outside, the fields stretched endless beneath the stars, and the mountains stood like ancient guardians, bearing witness to this quiet, tender healing. "What happens now?" Ingrid whispered against his chest. "The town still hates us. We still have no supplies. We still—" Samuel tilted her chin until her eyes met his voice firm yet gentle. "We have each other. And that is more than most people ever get. It's enough." Her tears slipped freely now, not with sorrow, but with the unsteady joy of release. The horizon beyond the window began to glow, dawn spilling soft light across the world. A new day, fragile and bright, was breaking. Samuel took her hand, leading her back to their bed, to the place where wounds were laid down and healing was born. As she rested her head against his chest once more, she whispered something in Norwegian, the sound soft as a prayer. He brushed her hair back, his voice curious. "What does it mean?" "It means," she whispered, eyes closing with the peace she had long been denied, "I am home." And she was. The battle with Cedar Ridge was not over, but something within had shifted. No longer did Ingrid stand as a woman trying to carve herself into something smaller. Now she stood as herself, vast, strong, tender, and finally unashamed. And beside her, Samuel knew with bone-deep certainty that whatever war still waited, they would face it together, and love would be the shield that turned back every storm. The months that followed carried both hardship and unexpected grace. Cedar Ridge did not soften easily. The whispers lingered, the cold shoulders remained, and more than once Samuel and Ingrid returned from town with nothing but glares for their trouble. Yet even in the face of this quiet exile, something began to change. It started with Jacob Reeves, who kept his silent promise by coming to the ranch with tools in hand. He did not speak much, but when he worked beside Ingrid, he treated her not as a curiosity, not as a monster, but as a neighbor. His presence was a balm, and Samuel saw the way Ingrid's posture eased, how her laughter, still rare, came quicker when Jacob clapped her shoulder and said simply, "Extraordinary." Others followed, hesitant at first. The young widow Thompson appeared one morning, her children clinging to her skirts, and asked shyly if Ingrid might help her mend a plough she could not afford to replace. Ingrid knelt down, showing the little ones how to hold the wood steady, her great hands gentle, her voice soothing as she taught their mother how to repair what was broken. When the widow left with a smile on her face and bread left behind as payment, Ingrid stood taller than she had in months. Healing flowed not only from what she received, but from what she gave, and Samuel knew then that his wife's strength was not meant to be hidden. It was meant to lift others. One by one, the outcasts of Cedar Ridge found their way to the Brennan Ranch. The too old, the too poor, the too different. And Ingrid welcomed them all. She spoke Norwegian hymns with Henrik Len, the aging man who had long believed himself forgotten. She showed a boy with a twisted leg how to carry buckets with balance rather than speed. She sat with women abandoned by husbands who had gone west and never returned, teaching them to split wood, to repair fences, to take up space in ways the town said they could not. Around her, those who had been unseen began to stand straighter, to believe in themselves again. Samuel watched it unfold like spring after a long winter. He saw his wife bloom, not smaller, not diminished, but radiant, commanding the space she had always deserved. Each day she carried the weight of others' brokenness, and each night she returned to him, weary but alive, laying her head against his chest as though he were the only place she could rest. In those hours, Samuel felt the rhythm of something holy, a healing that bound them both in threads stronger than steel. 5 months after Ingrid's arrival, she came to him in the barn, her face flushed with both joy and terror. She took his hands and pressed them against her stomach, her voice breaking as she whispered, "In Norway we have a saying, small children, small worries, big children, big worries. Samuel, I carry your child." Her eyes filled with tears, fear flooding her words. What if I am too strong? What if I hurt the baby? What if I am too much mother, too much woman, too much— He silenced her with a kiss, long and steady, until her trembling eased. When he pulled back, his hands framed her face, his eyes fierce with certainty. "You will be perfect, because you are you. Ingrid Brennan, you are exactly enough." The months of her pregnancy were filled with both trials and tenderness. The town whispered louder than ever, predicting calamity, doubting that such a woman could bring life safely into the world. But Samuel never left her side, not once. He sang to her belly when the nights grew long, whispered prayers of strength when fear clouded her eyes, held her hands through every wave of doubt. And when their daughter came in the spring, she entered the world with lungs full of thunder, her cry shaking the rafters of the cabin. She had her mother's fair hair, her father's stubborn jaw, and the undeniable fire of both. Ingrid held her child in trembling arms, her tears spilling freely. "She is so small," she whispered, awe breaking her voice. "So perfect and small." Samuel placed his hand over hers, his gaze soft and steady. "She is exactly right, just like her mother." And in that moment, Ingrid's fear dissolved. She realized she had never needed to be smaller to be loved. She had needed to be big enough to hold this much love, big enough to protect, to nurture, to build something that could endure. She pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead, whispering, "Big enough to finally, finally be enough." As the baby stirred between them, Samuel drew both into his arms, his family cradled against his chest. Outside, the Montana wind swept across the plains, but inside the small cabin was a warmth that no storm could steal. The healing that had begun with a single choice, the bed with you in it, had now taken root in the fragile cry of a newborn, in the laughter and tears of two broken souls who had chosen every day to see each other's worth. And though Cedar Ridge still whispered, though trials still waited on the horizon, Samuel and Ingrid knew they had built something stronger than any scorn. They had built a home, a family, a sanctuary where love was no longer a dream deferred, but a living, breathing truth. And as the night deepened around them, the future stretched wide, carrying the promise of every dawn yet to come. Years passed, not in silence, but in the steady music of a life built together, each day layering itself upon the last like the patient weaving of a quilt. The Brennan Ranch, once quiet and overlooked, became a refuge for those the town had cast aside. Widows brought their children to learn how to mend fences and plant fields. Men too old to work their own land came to lend a hand and share stories by the fire. The poor, the lonely, the broken, all found a place at Ingrid's table. She welcomed them with her great hands and greater heart, her laughter ringing across the yard like church bells calling the weary home. What had begun as whispers of scorn turned over time into murmurs of respect. The same voices that had once said too much now said strong, kind, brave. Samuel often paused to watch it all, leaning against a fence post with his arms folded, marveling at the transformation. Ingrid no longer bent herself into corners or tucked herself small in the shadows. She stood tall, her shoulders unburdened, her voice clear and unafraid. Where once she had apologized for her existence, now she claimed space boldly, not only for herself, but for everyone who needed permission to breathe freely. Healing had not only touched her, it flowed outward like water from a spring, giving life to others who had been parched too long. Their daughter Emma grew quickly, as children do, a whirlwind of fair hair and fierce spirit. By 5, she could already outrun the boys in town, her laughter echoing across the fields. Samuel saw his lost wife Emma's name bloom anew in this child, not as a shadow of grief, but as a continuation of love. Ingrid would kneel in the garden, teaching Emma how to press the soil around tiny tomato plants, her enormous hands unbelievably gentle as she guided her daughter's smaller ones. Samuel would stand watching them, his heart swelling with a gratitude too vast for words, remembering the man he had once been, alone, frozen, convinced love was finished for him. Now, with every sunrise, he was reminded that love not only returns but multiplies, rising from ashes with even deeper roots. Ingrid would catch him staring sometimes and call out, smiling in that way she reserved only for him. "What are you thinking, Samuel Brennan?" And he would answer honestly that I am the luckiest man in Montana. She would laugh, shaking her head, correcting him gently. Not luck, courage. It takes courage to love what the world tells you not to. It takes courage to see beauty where others only see strangeness. Then she would lean her head on his shoulder, her voice soft as prayer. "Thank you for being brave enough to choose me." Every night, when the house grew quiet and the fields outside whispered beneath the wind, they would lie in the same bed where everything had begun. Sometimes Ingrid would still ask, in a voice so fragile it undid him every time, "Do you ever regret it, choosing me?" And always, without hesitation, he would answer, "Never. Not once. Not ever." For the truth was simple. Her love had not only filled the empty places in him, it had healed them. She had given him not just a family, not just a home, but the courage to believe that broken people could build something beautiful together. In the end, theirs was not a story of perfection, but of persistence, not of fitting into the world's narrow mold, but of breaking it apart to make space for something truer. Their love was a testament to every soul who has ever been told they are too much, too big, too strong, too different. The truth is, those very things that make you feel unworthy may be the very things the world most needs. Love does not demand you be smaller. Love whispers instead, "You are exactly, perfectly enough." So let this story rest in your heart like a gentle light, reminding you that healing is always possible, that courage and tenderness can coexist, that love is real even when the world doubts it. If these words stirred something in you, let them ripple further. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe so you can journey with us through more tales of love, hope, and the quiet bravery of being yourself. Somewhere, someone needs to hear that they are not too much. They are exactly enough. And perhaps your voice, joined with ours, will help carry that truth a little further into the world.